No. The word came out before Vivienne Hargrove Stanton could stop it. Before the elevator doors had even finished opening. Before the marble lobby of Caldwell Meridian Capital had a chance to swallow her whole. The receptionist blinked. 30 years old, maybe 32, with the kind of practiced smile that costs companies money to train. "I'm sorry?" I said no. Vivienne adjusted the strap of her bag. Canvas, not leather, the kind that held tools, not laptops. "I don't have an appointment, but I need to speak with whoever is in charge of the Hargrove collection." The receptionist's smile didn't waver. It never does, in places like this. "Ma'am, Mr. Caldwell's calendar is full, I know." Vivienne set a single business card on the counter. No logo, no title, just her name, printed in plain black ink, and a phone number with a Chicago area code. "Tell him Vivienne Hargrove is downstairs. He'll make room." She sat in one of the low cream chairs near the window and waited. Here's what nobody in that lobby knew about the young woman sitting quietly with canvas bag on her knees. Her grandfather had built this city's first black-owned auction house in 1961. Her grandmother had authenticated 3 pieces of African-American folk art that the Smithsonian had initially dismissed, and Vivienne herself, at 28 years old, had spent the last 4 years doing restoration work out of a rented studio in Wicker Park, not because she couldn't get hired anywhere else, but because she had tried once and been told her portfolio was impressive for someone without a formal pedigree. She had walked out of that interview, gone home, and restored a water-damaged Horace Pippin study that had been sitting in a church basement for 40 years. The church sold it at auction 14 months later for $600,000. Vivienne had gone back to her studio and kept working. Upstairs, she didn't know it yet, but the receptionist had already made the call. The elevator opened on the 42nd floor, and a young man in a gray suit walked Vivienne through a hallway, lined with framed acquisition documents, the paper trail of wealth, curated like trophies. She noticed, as she always did, what was missing. The Caldwell Meridian collection was famous for its holdings in early American modernism. What it did not have, what it had conspicuously never had, was a single authenticated piece from the Hargrove archive. Her grandfather's archive. The one that had been lost in a disputed estate settlement in 2019. The one that had reappeared 18 months ago in a private sale quietly arranged by Caldwell Meridian Capital. The one that now sat in a climate-controlled room on the 42nd floor, waiting to be displayed at a gala next week as part of the Reginald Caldwell Legacy collection. Reginald Caldwell himself was standing at the window when she walked in. 71 years old, silver-haired. The kind of man who had shaken hands with senators and never once questioned whether he deserved to be in the room. He turned slowly when she entered, and the look on his face was not hostility. Not yet. It was something more familiar, and in some ways more difficult to endure. It was the look of a man who had already decided what she was. "Miss Hargrove." He did not offer his hand. "I have to say, I was surprised you came in person. A letter from your attorney would have been the conventional approach." "I don't have an attorney," Vivienne said. "I have the truth, and I have about 40 minutes before my next job. So let's be efficient." That got a small reaction. A flicker at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, not quite contempt. Something in between. "You understand," he said, clasping his hands behind his back, "that the acquisition of the Hargrove archive was entirely above board. Documented, notarized, and reviewed by 3 members of your own legal team," Vivienne said. "I know. I read the filings." She crossed to the center of the room and stopped, equidistant between the door and the window. Not confrontational, just present. "I'm not here to argue legality with you, Mr. Caldwell. I'm here because of something specific. One piece." He waited. "The Wellbrook panel," she said. Something changed in the room then. Not dramatic. Reginald Caldwell was too disciplined for drama. But there was a stillness that hadn't been there before. The kind of stillness that only exists when someone hears a word they were hoping not to hear. "The Wellbrook panel," he repeated, as if tasting the words. It's part of the collection, authenticated, cataloged, and scheduled for public display on Saturday. It shouldn't be. He let out a short breath, not quite a laugh. And why is that? Because it's not finished. Vivienne set her bag down on the table between them. The conference table that cost more than her entire studio setup. She was certain, and opened the front pocket. She withdrew a manila folder, thin, and placed it flat on the table, without opening it. My grandfather never finished it. He documented that himself. In the letter he wrote to my grandmother in October 1987, he described it as. She paused, recalling the exact phrasing, because she had read it so many times it had become part of her own internal language. The painting that still needs to breathe. Reginald Caldwell looked at the folder. He did not touch it. That letter, he said carefully, is not part of the authenticated record. No, Vivienne agreed. It's in my grandmother's hat box. It has been since 1987. She paused. Along with a photograph of the panel taken that same October. In the photograph, the lower left quadrant is unpainted. The room was very quiet. Outside, 42 floors down, the city moved the way it always moves, indifferent and continuous. Caldwell walked around the table. Not toward her, toward the window. It was a move she recognized. The deliberate reorientation of a man who needs a moment to recalculate. When he turned back, his voice had shifted into something more formal, more measured, the tone of a man accustomed to negotiating. Even if what you're describing were accurate, he said, the authentication process for the Wellbrook panel included ultraviolet analysis, X-ray imaging, and a review by Dr. Forsyth at the Whitmore Institute, Vivienne said. I read that too. He blinked. Dr. Forsyth is very good, she continued. He's also primarily a provenance specialist, not a technique analyst. His review confirmed the pigment dating and the signature. It did not include a structural assessment of the paint surface. She reached into her bag again. This time, she withdrew something different. A folded piece of paper, slightly worn at the crease, printed with 2 photographs, side by side. She placed it on the table next to the folder, but still didn't push either toward him. The photograph, from 1987, she said, nodding to the left image, and a detailed scan of the lower left quadrant of the panel as it exists today. A nod to the right image. I obtained the detail scan from the catalog proof your own team published for the gala. Caldwell looked at the paper. The left image showed a painting, photographed in natural light in what appeared to be a small studio. Unfinished at the bottom left. The canvas showing through in ragged patches, unpainted geometry that was clearly deliberate. The right image, extracted from a glossy catalog page, showed the same area, fully painted, complete, different. Someone finished it, Vivienne said. Not accusatory, just factual, the way a doctor names a diagnosis, without pleasure, without drama, because the truth doesn't require either. Caldwell set the paper down. He stood very still for a moment. Then he walked to his desk and pressed a button on his phone. Send Marcus in. They waited. Vivienne looked at the wall. A large, framed photograph. A group of men at what appeared to be a foundation dinner. Everyone in black tie. Everyone over 60. Everyone smiling the comfortable smile of people who have never had to explain themselves. A man entered. Younger than Caldwell, mid-50s, in a navy suit. He was introduced as Marcus Webb, Senior Director of Collections. He looked at Vivienne with the practiced neutrality of someone who had been in rooms like this before, who knew how to wait to understand what role he was being asked to play before he committed to an expression. Miss Hargrove has raised some concerns about the Wellbrook panel, Caldwell said. I want your perspective. Marcus Webb looked at the photographs on the table. He looked at them for a long time. Then he said, Where did you get the 1987 image? My grandmother, Vivienne said. She kept everything. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, not quite. More like recognition. The way a person looks when a thing they have tried not to think about suddenly appears in front of them in a room with no exits. The panel, he said slowly, went through significant restoration before acquisition. Restoration of what? Vivienne asked. My grandfather described it as physically intact. There was no damage, no water, no cracking. It wasn't finished, but it wasn't damaged. The assessment at the time. Marcus. Caldwell's voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that means something. Marcus Webb stopped talking. Here's what the room held then, between those three people. A truth that had been moving underground for years, the way water finds a path below stone, and a young woman who had followed the sound of it all the way to a 42nd floor office in the middle of a Tuesday morning. Vivienne had not come to make accusations. She had not come with a lawyer or a journalist. She had come, she told herself on the train ride over, the way her grandfather would have come, with evidence, with courtesy, and with absolute clarity about what she knew. I want the panel examined, she said, not by your authenticators, by an independent conservator, with experience in mid-century African-American technique. I have 3 names. Any one of them would be acceptable to me. She reached into the folder and withdrew a typed sheet. The names, credentials, contact information. I'm not asking to take the panel. I'm not asking for a public statement. I'm asking for an honest examination before you display it on Saturday. Reginald Caldwell had not moved from behind his desk. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. And she had spent years learning to read rooms, to read the subtle hierarchies encoded in gesture and gaze that determined whether she would be taken seriously or managed. This expression was different. It was not dismissal. It was. And she wouldn't have the word for it until later, sitting on the train back to Wicker Park, watching the city blur past the window. It was the expression of a man who has just realized he underestimated something. Give me until tomorrow morning, he said. The gala is Saturday. I know when my gala is, Miss Hargrove. A pause. Then, quieter. I'll have the panel reviewed. If what you're showing me is accurate, we'll pull it from the display, and the provenance documentation will be corrected. A long pause. Marcus Webb had gone very still by the door. The provenance documentation, Caldwell said carefully, will accurately reflect the panel's history. Vivienne nodded once. She picked up the folder and the photographs, returned them to her bag, and zipped it closed. She picked up her single business card from where it still sat on the corner of the table. He had never moved it, and slid it into her pocket. Thank you for your time, she said. She was at the door when Reginald Caldwell spoke again. Your grandfather, he said. I knew his work, long before all of this. A pause. He was remarkable. Vivienne stopped. She didn't turn immediately. She gave it a breath the way her grandmother had taught her. Don't let them see the moment before you're ready. Then she turned. He was, she said simply. He still is. She left. The elevator ride down was 42 floors of silence. She looked at her reflection in the polished doors. Canvas bag, work jacket, hair pulled back the way she always wore it when she had a job to get to. 28 years old. Daughter of a schoolteacher and a maintenance supervisor. Granddaughter of 2 people who had built something worth protecting. She thought about what her grandfather had written in that letter, the one she had memorized, because the hat box had been given to her when she was 25, and she had read every letter in it within a week. A painting that isn't finished doesn't need to be rushed. It needs to be trusted. The right completion will come, or it won't. But it must never be forced by someone else's hand. He had been talking about the Wellbrook panel. He had also, she understood now, been talking about everything else. The lobby doors opened. The city came in, cold air, exhaust, the particular sound of a Chicago Tuesday. She pulled out her phone and texted her next client. On my way. Running about 10 minutes early, actually. She had a 1940s oil landscape to restore in a frame shop on the north side. The owner was 73 and had bought the painting at a garage sale 40 years ago, not knowing what it was. Vivienne had identified it 6 months ago. They were still working through what to do with that information. Cautiously, carefully, together. That was the work. That was always the work. Not the 42nd floor, not the confrontation, not even the outcome. Though she believed in the outcome, believed it the way you believe in the return of something that was never really gone. The work was the knowing, the careful, unglamorous, stubborn act of seeing a thing truly, when everyone around you had decided it wasn't worth the looking. By Friday afternoon, the Wellbrook panel had been quietly withdrawn from the Saturday program. The press release cited a scheduling revision, the kind of language that reveals nothing and implies everything. A conservator named Dr. Adeze Okonkwo, Vivienne's first choice on the list, a specialist in mid-century Black American visual traditions at the Art Institute, had been brought in Thursday morning and issued her findings by end of day. Vivienne learned all of this not from Caldwell Meridian Capital, but from a message that arrived Friday at 6:14 p.m. from a number she didn't recognize. Provenance file for Wellbrook panel is being corrected. Documentation will reflect incomplete status at time of Ezra Hargrove's death, 2003, and unauthorized completion prior to acquisition. Thought you should know before the weekend. M.W. Marcus Webb, Senior Director of Collections. She read the message twice, standing in her studio with a brush in her hand and a light damaged canvas on the easel in front of her. Then, she set down the brush, walked to the small window that looked out over the alley behind the building, and let herself stand there for a moment in the quiet. She thought about her grandfather. The photographs of him she knew by heart, standing in his first studio, 1958, 23 years old. With the particular posture of someone who knows exactly how good they are and has decided not to hide it. Teaching a class in 1974, students crowded around, his hands describing something in the air with total certainty. Sitting in the chair by the window in his final years, a sketchbook open, still working, he had never once, in any photograph she'd ever seen, looked like a man who needed permission. She had been trying her whole life to look like that. The gala happened on Saturday without the Wellbrook panel. In its place, Caldwell Meridian displayed a digital presentation, archival photographs, documentation, a recorded statement about ongoing provenance review that told the public very little and told anyone paying close attention everything. Vivienne wasn't there. She had a previous engagement, dinner with her grandmother, Vivienne Hargrove, 81 years old, and in possession of the most intact memory of anyone Vivienne had ever known. They ate at the table where Vivienne had grown up eating. Her grandmother made the same food she had always made: collard greens, cornbread, baked chicken that had been marinating since Thursday. The hatbox sat on the side table, as it often did when Vivienne visited, as if her grandmother liked to have it in the room. Vivienne told her about the week, all of it. She didn't soften it and didn't dramatize it. Her grandmother listened without interrupting. When Vivienne finished, Vivienne Hargrove was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your grandfather knew it would happen. That someone would try to complete the panel? That someone would try to claim it." She reached over and straightened the salt shaker, a small habitual gesture that meant she was settling in to say something real. "He told me once that the hardest part of being good at something is that other people want to own what you made, not borrow it, not learn from it, own it." She looked at Vivienne. He said the only protection against that is witnesses. People who know, people who remember. Vivienne thought about the letter in the hatbox, the photograph taken in October 1987, the care her grandmother had taken, over decades, to preserve both. "You kept all of it on purpose," Vivienne said. Vivienne Hargrove smiled. It was a very specific kind of smile. The smile of a woman who has been patient for a very long time and is now watching that patience bear weight. "I kept all of it because it was his," she said, "and because I knew someday someone in this family would need to walk into a room and know the truth without flinching." She reached out and put her hand over Vivienne's. "You are," she said, "so much your grandfather's child." 3 months later, the Wellbrook panel was returned to the Hargrove family. The process was not quick and was not without legal friction. There was a dispute, a mediated settlement, a correction of the public record. Vivienne did not do it alone. She was joined eventually by 2 other families, with similar claims against similar institutions, and a law clinic specializing in cultural property disputes, that she had not known existed until someone told her about it in the comments section of a small art history newsletter. The world is funny that way. When the panel came home, Vivienne brought it to her studio. She stood in front of it for a long time. The lower left quadrant had been carefully reversed by Dr. Okonkwo. The unauthorized additions removed, the original canvas surface stabilized, the incomplete section documented and preserved exactly as her grandfather had left it. It was imperfect, unfinished. The unpainted geometry in the lower corner looked like nothing so much as a door left ajar. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She thought about his words. A painting that isn't finished doesn't need to be rushed. She thought about what it means to respect the incompleteness of a thing, to recognize that not every gap is a flaw, that sometimes what's missing is exactly what gives the whole its meaning. She didn't complete it. She never intended to. She loaned it to a small gallery on the south side of Chicago, the kind of place that puts metal chairs in folding rows and serves wine in plastic cups, and has the most important conversations about art she has ever heard. The placard on the wall read, "Wellbrook Panel, Unfinished, Ezra Hargrove, c. 1987, loaned by the Hargrove family." And below that, in smaller text, something Vivienne had asked the gallery to include. Not a formal note, not a curatorial statement, just a sentence from her grandfather's letter. The right completion will come, or it won't, but it must never be forced by someone else's hand. The gallery was open on a Thursday evening when an older man came in alone. He stood in front of the panel for a long time. He read the placard. He read it again. When he left, the woman at the front desk, who had seen a lot of people come through in her years there, said later that she had never seen someone look at a painting the way that man looked at that one, like he was recognizing something he hadn't known he'd lost. Some names the world tries to erase. Some things the people who love them refuse to let disappear. And sometimes, not always, not easily, but sometimes, the truth turns out to be more stubborn than the people who tried to bury it. Vivienne Hargrove went back to work.